Thank you for being here with me. If you are comfortable, share where you are listening from and what time it is there. It helps me feel less alone while I speak these words. My name is Evelyn Gray, and this is my story. I want to start by telling you something very small but very real. When a person has lived a long life, people often think they know who you are. They think your story is already finished. They look at your hair turning white, your body slowing down, and they believe you have no more chapters left. But the truth is, sometimes the most unexpected and powerful chapters happen when you least expect them. They happen when you are tired, when you feel forgotten, when you think the world has already closed its doors on you. I know this because that is exactly what happened to me. I was abandoned, not by strangers, but by my own family, by my son and his wife. They left me on a lonely mountain road in a foreign country. They laughed as I stood there with nothing but my handbag. They thought it was funny. They thought I was too small, too powerless, too old to matter. But life has a strange way of turning things around. 1 month later, the same son who laughed at me sat in front of a television screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. The same woman who mocked me scrolled through her phone, her world collapsing under the weight of truth. And me, I was not broken. I was not lost. I had walked into a new life, a bigger life than I had ever imagined. But before I take you there, I want you to understand where I came from, because the story does not begin on that mountain road. It begins in the quiet of my home, a place where silence was my companion. My house was not grand. It was not filled with new things or modern designs. It was filled with threads, cloth, and memory. For 40 years, I worked as a textile historian. That is just a long way of saying I spent my life studying the fabrics and colors of the past. Some people find meaning in numbers, others in machines, but for me, meaning was in the weave of cloth. I collected small pieces, a scrap of silk from centuries ago, a fragment of linen once buried with the dead, a tiny square of wool that carried the scent of the earth. These were my treasures. They covered the walls of my home like saints in a chapel. They were proof that beauty survives even when empires fall. When my husband died 5 years ago, the house became even quieter. The rooms felt larger, emptier. I filled the silence with the sound of my looms, wooden frames that held threads tight, waiting for the shuttle to carry them across. When I sat at the loom, I felt connected to the past, to myself, to something bigger. But even that comfort could not take away the loneliness that slowly spread inside me. My only bridge to the outside world was my son, Marco. He was my pride once. He grew up curious, full of questions, eager to learn. But as he grew older, the boy I knew faded. He stepped into a world I did not understand. He became a man of business, of marketing, of selling things people did not truly need. He married Ruby, a woman whose life was lived in front of cameras and strangers. To them, the world was a stage. To me, the world was a library, a memory, a sacred story written in threads. Our worlds did not meet. Still, I held on. I thought love could bridge the gap. I thought if I just stayed close, if I just kept saying yes, maybe I could still reach him. Maybe I could find the boy I once knew. That is why when he and Ruby invited me on a trip to Italy, I said yes. My heart wanted to believe it was a chance for us to reconnect, a chance to be a family again. I should have listened to the quiet voice inside me, the one that whispered this trip was not for me, that I would not fit in their world of perfect photos and empty smiles. But love makes you foolish. Love makes you hope against reason. So I packed my simple dresses, my sturdy shoes, and I carried my quiet heart into their noisy world. This is where my story truly begins. On a journey I should never have taken, with people I thought I knew, walking toward a pain I never imagined. But as you will see, it was also the journey that carried me into the most surprising and powerful part of my life. Before I continue, I want to ask all of you to please give a like to this video and subscribe to my channel, The Silent Stories, for more stories like mine. Your support means the world to me. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. It's incredible to see how far this community of wonderful people has grown, and I'm so grateful to be able to share my story with you. My home is not large, not modern, and not filled with bright new things. It is an old house with wooden floors that creak in the night and walls that hold shadows of all the years I have lived there. To many, it might look plain, even dull, but to me, it is alive. Every corner carries a story. Every shelf carries a memory. When you step inside, the first thing you notice is not the furniture, not the walls, but the smell. It smells of dust and paper, but also of thread, of wool, and sometimes of flowers I dry in jars. In the morning, the sunlight enters through thin curtains and lies across the floor like a pale blanket. The rooms are quiet, so quiet that I can hear the tick of the clock, the sigh of the wind outside, even the faint scratch of my own pen when I take notes in my old books. On the walls hang frames, not frames of photographs or paintings, but frames of cloth, small pieces of fabric I collected over decades. There is a piece of linen from an old burial shroud, its threads worn thin but still holding. There is a scrap of silk that once traveled on the Silk Road. There is wool dyed in a shade of red so deep that it feels alive, though it was made centuries ago. To anyone else, these are just old rags. But to me, they are saints. They are voices from the past that refuse to be silenced. I spent 40 years teaching, writing, and studying. People called me a textile historian, but I always thought of myself as a listener. I listen to cloth the way others listen to music. Cloth carries stories. It carries the sweat of workers, the taste of the soil, the hand of the weaver. Every thread is a memory of someone's life. When I explained this to my students, many smiled politely but did not truly understand. That was fine. My joy was in the work itself. At the center of my house stands my 3 looms, large wooden frames, old but strong. To most, they look like furniture too heavy to move. To me, they are companions. I run my hands over their smooth beams and feel comfort. When I sit at the bench, place the shuttle in my hands, and press my feet on the pedals, the world changes. The rhythm of weaving is like breathing. It is slow, steady, and healing. Hours pass without notice. The noise in my head falls silent. It is only me, the threads, and the soft sound of creation. When my husband Peter was alive, he used to joke that the looms were my second marriage. He would watch me from the doorway, smile, and bring me tea. He never complained, though he did not always understand my obsession. He died 5 years ago, and after that the looms became more than just tools. They became my lifeline. Each day I sat with them, not just to weave cloth, but to hold myself together. But even looms cannot fight loneliness forever. My house, though full of threads, was empty of voices. I ate meals alone, walked the garden alone, and fell asleep to silence. I had friends, yes, but most had moved away, or grown busy with their families. I had my son Marco, but even he was more like a visitor from another planet than part of my world. His life was too fast, too sharp, too bright. When he visited, he carried with him the smell of new cars, polished shoes, and expensive perfume. He spoke about clients and deals and meetings I did not understand. He loved me, I believe, but he also looked at me as if I belonged to a different century. Sometimes I would try to show him my fabrics. I would hold out a piece of old silk and explain its history. He would nod politely, glance at his phone, and then quickly change the subject. His wife Ruby was even less patient. To her my cloths were nothing but dull old junk. She loved things that were new, shiny and loud. She lived for her photographs, her followers, her endless need to be seen. I knew I did not fit in her world. In truth, she did not want me there. Still I tried. I told myself Marco, he was my son, the boy I had carried, the boy who once asked me questions about the stars. I told myself there must be a way back to him. That is why I agreed to the trip. Not because I wanted to sit in hotels or eat in expensive places, but because I hoped the journey would give me a piece of my son again. My home was safe, but it was also lonely, and loneliness can make you do foolish things. When I locked my door and walked out with my suitcase, I told myself I would return in 2 weeks, with memories to warm me. I did not know that I was leaving behind the life I had known, and stepping into a test I could never have imagined. My home was full of threads, but the thread of my story was about to twist in a way I could not foresee. I can still picture that morning clearly. The smell of dust, the looms sitting silent, the sun spilling across the floor. I placed my hand on the door frame one last time and whispered goodbye. I thought it would be a short parting. I did not know then that I would return as someone else entirely. When I agreed to the trip, I told myself it was a gift, a chance to be with Marco again, a chance to sit across from him at dinner, to hear him laugh, to touch the boy I remembered. But almost as soon as we arrived, I understood the truth. This was not my trip, it was theirs. We landed in Rome first. I remember the noise, the crowds, the bright flashes of cameras. Marco and Ruby walked fast through the airport, pulling shiny suitcases, their phones in their hands. I followed behind, clutching my old brown bag, already feeling out of place. Ruby kept stopping to take photos, turning her face this way and that, smiling wide at nothing. She asked Marco to take dozens of pictures of her with her coffee, her shoes, her hat. I watched and felt invisible. The hotel they booked was tall and glassy, full of lights and mirrors. The room they gave me was clean and white, but it felt cold. I unpacked my linen dresses and placed them neatly in the closet. Next door, I heard Ruby laughing loudly as she tried on outfits. The next days were filled with rushing. They took me to restaurants where the food looked like art but tasted of nothing. They dragged me through streets lined with shops, where Ruby slipped into dresses that cost more than I had spent on my whole trip. She spun in front of mirrors and asked, "What do you think, Evelyn? Isn't this perfect?" I smiled weakly and said, "It's nice," but in truth I felt sick. I tried to share what I loved. Once while walking on a cobblestone street, I bent down and touched the stones. I told Marco, "Do you know, these same stones felt the steps of emperors, of people long gone, but still here under our feet." Ruby rolled her eyes. "That's cute," she said, "but let's not waste time. I need to find the boutique before it closes." Marco gave me a quick smile, but then hurried after her. One afternoon I begged them to visit a small textile museum. It was hidden away in a quiet street. My heart raced as we walked inside. The air smelled of old cloth. My eyes filled with tears when I saw the looms, the ancient fabrics, the dyes. I wanted to stay for hours. But after 10 minutes, Ruby groaned. "The lighting here is awful. I can't get a single good photo." She pulled Marco's arm and led him out. I followed, crushed. Each day I felt the distance between us grow. Marco tried sometimes. He pointed at an old arch and said, "Look, Mom, this is cool, right?" But one sharp look from Ruby silenced him. He shrank beside her. He was not my boy anymore. He was her husband, her shadow. The rift was not only in the places we visited, it was in our meals, our talks, even our silences. At breakfast, Ruby scrolled on her phone, while Marco tapped at his laptop. I sat across the table eating bread and honey, unseen. At night in my hotel bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "Why did you come?" Still I tried. Love makes fools of us. I told myself tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow Marco would sit with me, talk with me, remember me. But tomorrow always came, and tomorrow always broke me a little more. Then came the turning point. Ruby announced she had booked a villa in the countryside. "It's rustic chic," she said, smiling. "Perfect for photos." I nodded. I did not argue. I thought maybe the quiet of the mountains would soften her. Maybe in silence we could find peace. The villa was beautiful. I will not deny that. Old stone walls, wide views of green valleys, sunlight on the hills, but the silence did not bring peace. It only made the tension sharper. In the empty air we could hear the weight of everything unspoken. It was there, in that villa, that the real argument began. Over breakfast, with bread and fruit on the table, I mentioned a village I had read about in my research. They still practiced an ancient form of weaving there. My voice trembled with hope as I asked if we could visit. Ruby laughed. Weaving. Evelyn, nobody cares about that. My followers want fashion, not old ladies with looms. I held my ground. I spoke of history, of memory, of culture. My voice was quiet but firm. Ruby's face hardened. Her sweet tone dropped. You think you're better than us. You think your boring hobbies make you special, but we live in the real world. Marco sat between us, silent and weak. He tried to calm us. Maybe we can split the day, he whispered. But it was too late. The battle lines were drawn. I looked at my son and saw the truth. He would never choose me. He would always choose her. That morning, over a simple question of where to go, the thin thread holding us together snapped. I knew it in my bones. The rift was no longer small. It was a canyon, and I was standing alone on one side, staring at the boy I once knew, who now belonged to someone else. I thought the pain had reached its peak, but I was wrong. The worst was still waiting, and it would arrive on a quiet road, under the hot sun with no one else around. The air in the mountains was sharp and still. The road was narrow, curling along the side of the hill like a thin thread. On one side stood tall pine trees, dark and silent. On the other side, the ground dropped away into a deep valley. The car moved slowly, its tires crunching on gravel. None of us spoke. The silence in the car was heavy. Ruby sat in the front seat, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on the glass. Marco's hands gripped the wheel. His knuckles were white, his jaw tight. I sat in the back seat, staring out at the hills. My chest felt tight, but I said nothing. Words had already failed us that morning. After a long while, the car slowed. Marco pulled over onto the shoulder. The engine hummed, then went quiet. I thought he had stopped to look at the map or rest. I looked up, waiting. Then Ruby turned to me. Her eyes were cold. Her lips were thin. Her voice was sharp and flat. "Get out," she said. I blinked, confused. "What?" My voice was small, almost childlike. She repeated it, louder. "Get out of the car." I looked at Marco, my son, the boy I had held in my arms. He stared straight ahead. He did not look at me. He did not speak. His silence was louder than Ruby's words. I shook my head slowly. "You can't mean that." Then Marco spoke. His voice was low, but his words cut deep. "Get out, Mom. Let's see how right you feel when you have no way home." And then he laughed. A short, cruel laugh. Ruby laughed too. High, sharp, ugly. Their laughter filled the car like poison. My heart stopped. My hands trembled. For a moment I thought I might faint. I reached for the door handle. My fingers felt heavy, like stone. With slow, shaking hands, I opened the door. The air outside was warm. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I stepped out. I held my handbag close. That was all I had. My clothes, my passport, a little money, and a book I had carried for comfort. Nothing else. The doors slammed shut. The sound echoed against the mountains like the closing of a cell. Marco's face did not turn. He started the engine. The car rolled forward. Dust rose up in the air, wrapping around me like smoke. I stood frozen as the car disappeared around the bend. Their laughter still echoed in my ears. The silence that followed was worse. No voices, no car, just the faint whisper of the wind and the distant call of a bird. I sank to my knees on the gravel. Sharp stones bit into my skin. My breath came in gasps. My chest ached as though it had been struck. My son had left me. Not strangers, not enemies. My son, my own blood. I pressed my face into my hands. Tears ran down, hot and bitter. The pain was not just in my heart. It was in my body, heavy and sharp. I felt hollow, broken. For a long time I stayed there, kneeling on the side of the road, my body shaking. I whispered his name, Marco, but no answer came. Only silence. At last the tears slowed. My breath steadied. My hands dropped to my lap. A new feeling rose in me. It was not anger, not yet. It was something older, something that had lived in me for years. Resilience. I had survived loss before. I had survived years of hard work. I had survived the death of my husband. I would survive this too. I pushed myself to my feet. My knees hurt. Dust clung to my dress. My face was wet with tears. But I stood. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand. I looked at the sun, high above the valley. I looked at the road curling forward. I knew one thing. The road must lead somewhere. Roads always do. I remembered the village I had spoken of that morning, the one where weaving still lived. I had studied its location in old books. I had traced it on maps. It was near, maybe only a few miles. If I kept walking, I could reach it. The thought gave me strength. I lifted my bag onto my shoulder. I took a deep breath of the mountain air, and I began to walk. Each step was heavy, but each step was mine. I did not look back. Behind me was betrayal, laughter, and loss. Ahead of me was only the unknown. But at least it was mine. The road stretched on hot under the sun. My legs burned. My throat ached, but I kept moving. I told myself, forward, forward, forward. On that lonely mountain road, with nothing but dust and silence around me, I made a choice. I would not break. I would not die there. I would walk. I would live. The first steps felt like stone. My legs were stiff, my chest still heavy with grief. The sun pressed down hard. The road ahead stretched long and empty. But I walked, I told myself again and again, forward. At first every sound made me flinch. The wind rustling through the pines, the distant cry of a bird, the crack of a pebble under my shoes. I kept looking back, half expecting the car to return, half hoping Marco would come rushing back, saying it was a cruel joke, saying he was sorry. But the road behind me stayed silent. They were gone. The air was hot and dry. Soon dust clung to my skin, to my clothes, to my throat. I reached for the small bottle of water in my bag. I sipped slowly, knowing it had to last. My tongue felt thick, but I forced myself to keep walking. The road curved sharply upward. My breath grew ragged. My legs burned. I stopped often, leaning against stones, pressing my palm to my chest. My body wanted to sit, to give up, to sink into the gravel and close my eyes. But I knew if I sat too long I might not rise again. So I whispered to myself, just a little more, just a little further. And I stepped forward. As I walked, I tried to focus on small things. The smell of wild thyme that grew between the rocks, the shimmer of heat on the road, the silver leaves of olive trees swaying in the wind, the sound of goat bells far away. Each detail was like a stitch, holding me together. The historian inside me began to notice more. The road was old. I saw grooves carved deep into the stone, marks left by wheels from long ago. Roman wheels, maybe. Centuries of travelers had walked this way before me. That thought steadied me. I was not alone. I was walking with ghosts. Hours passed. My feet ached. My shoes rubbed blisters raw. My back ached from the weight of the bag. Sweat stung my eyes. I wanted to cry again, but the tears had dried. Instead, I pushed forward, each step a quiet act of defiance. At one bend in the road, I stopped and looked out over the valley. The sun was lowering, painting the hills gold. For the first time since the car door slammed, I felt something strange. It was not joy, it was not peace, but it was a flicker of freedom. No one was telling me where to go. No one was mocking me. The road was mine alone. I thought of Marco then. I pictured his face when he was a boy, running barefoot through fields, his hair messy, his eyes bright. I thought of the bedtime stories I told him, the way he once clung to me when he was afraid. Where had that boy gone? How had he turned into a man who could laugh while his mother stood abandoned? The ache of that thought nearly broke me, but I forced myself to keep moving. Love had not saved me. Only my own strength could now. The sky turned softer. Shadows stretched long across the stones. My throat burned with thirst. My body screamed for rest. Then, just as I thought I could walk no more, I saw it. Far ahead, clinging to the side of the mountain, was a cluster of stone houses, a village. My heart leapt. My legs felt lighter. I whispered, "Thank you," though I did not know to whom. Maybe to God, maybe to fate, maybe to the women of the past, whose cloth I had studied, who had walked roads like this, carrying water, carrying wood, carrying burdens far heavier than mine. I walked faster. As I entered the village, the cobblestones rattled under my feet. Old men sat on a bench, their faces weathered. Women swept their doorsteps, dressed in black. They all stopped and stared. I must have looked strange, dusty, tired. My hair stuck to my face. Their eyes were sharp, cautious. I felt small, out of place. But I did not ask for pity. I did not beg for water. I asked the only question that mattered to me. In halting Italian, I said, "Please, I came to see the weaving." There was silence. Then one old woman, her face thin and strong like carved wood, stepped forward. Her eyes studied me for a long time. At last she nodded once. With a small gesture, she told me to follow. I clutched my bag tighter and stepped behind her. My legs trembled, but my heart beat strong. The road had brought me here, to the place I was meant to be. The woman who led me through the village was small but strong. Her back was straight, her steps firm. She did not speak much. I followed her through narrow lanes, past stone houses with roofs of faded red tiles. Chickens clucked in the dust. The smell of wood smoke drifted in the air. We came to a low building at the edge of the village. Its door was heavy, made of wood darkened by age. She pushed it open and nodded for me to go inside. The first thing I heard was the sound. A steady, soft rhythm, the clack of wood, the sigh of thread pulled tight. It was the sound of looms. My heart quickened. The room was wide and filled with light from high, narrow windows. 4 looms stood there, each one tall and solid. At them sat 4 women. Their hands moved quickly but gently. Their faces were lined with age, their eyes focused. The cloth on their looms shimmered in colors I had never seen. So bright, so alive. When I stepped inside, the sound slowed. The women stopped and looked at me. Their eyes were sharp, full of suspicion. I felt the weight of their gaze. I knew what they saw. A stranger, dusty, out of place, carrying a bag that did not belong here. The woman who had brought me in, her name I would later learn was Rosa, spoke to them in a dialect I could not follow. They answered her in short words, their faces still hard. I knew then that words would not be enough. I could not explain who I was. I could not explain why I had come. They would not believe me. I had to show them. My eyes fell on the empty loom in the corner. Its bench was bare. Slowly I walked toward it. My heart pounded. My hands trembled. Still I sat down. I touched the frame. The wood was smooth, worn from years of use. I placed my hands on the shuttle. My feet found the pedals. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed. Then I began. The rhythm came back to me like an old song. The shuttle slid left, then right. The pedals pressed down. The threads tightened and loosened. The cloth began to grow, inch by inch. My body remembered what my mind did not have to think. The room grew quiet. I felt their eyes on me. My fingers moved faster, steadier. I was not perfect, not as skilled as they were, but I was not a beginner either. I had spent my life studying, weaving, listening to threads, and the loom knew it. The cloth I wove was simple, but it was true. After a few minutes I stopped. I set the shuttle down. My hands rested on my lap. I lifted my eyes. The women stared. Their suspicion had changed. Their faces softened, their eyes warmer. They knew, they saw I was not a tourist, not a woman who came to gawk. I was one of them. Rosa stepped forward. She leaned over the loom, touched the small piece of cloth I had made. Her fingers brushed it gently. Then she looked at me and smiled. It was small, but it was real. She placed her hand on my shoulder. In that moment, I felt something shift. I was no longer a stranger. For the first time in days, I felt safe. I felt I had stepped into the place where I belonged. The days that followed were quiet but full. I stayed in Rosa's small house. Her kitchen smelled of bread and herbs. She gave me a bed by the window. Each morning I walked back to the workshop with her. Each day I sat at the loom. The other women watched me at first. Slowly, they began to smile, to nod, to speak to me in their own tongue. I could not always understand the words, but I understood their hands, their eyes, their laughter. We shared the same language of thread. I learned from them, and they, in small ways, learned from me. I showed them patterns I had studied in books, old designs their grandmothers had once known. Their eyes lit up when they saw them take shape again. We were not just weaving cloth, we were weaving trust, weaving friendship, weaving a bridge between past and present. At night I lay in bed, tired but full. The pain of betrayal was still inside me, sharp and deep, but it was softened by something new, belonging, purpose. The loom held me, the women held me, the village held me. For the first time since Marco drove away, I whispered to myself, "You are not broken, you are not lost, you are found." The weaving in the village was strong and steady. The women's hands were sure. The cloth grew quickly on the looms. But what caught my heart most were the colors. They glowed, they shimmered, as if light itself was trapped inside the threads. I had studied colors all my life, but I had never seen shades like these. One evening I asked Rosa, "Where do the dyes come from?" She shrugged and pointed toward the mountains. "From here," she said, "no more." Her voice closed like a door, but my mind would not rest. I had spent years reading old texts, studying recipes of ancient dyers. I remembered notes about plants and insects, about roots that could bring fire to cloth, about moss that could hold the sea inside. I thought perhaps these hills still carried secrets that the rest of the world had forgotten. The next morning I took a basket and walked out into the sun. I climbed the paths where goats had walked. I bent down to study the bark of trees, the leaves underfoot, the tiny flowers that grew between stones. I searched with eyes sharpened by years of study. I found roots of madder, red and earthy. I found chamomile, bright and yellow. These were common, yes. But then deeper in a shaded ravine, I found something rare, a gray-green lichen clinging to the bark of an old oak. My breath caught. Orchil, a plant once used to make purples fit for kings. Thought lost. Yet here it was, alive in my hands. I pressed it gently into my basket and kept walking. Later I found small insects on oak leaves. Their bodies, when crushed, gave a red so rich it looked like blood and fire together. Kerms, another lost treasure. My heart raced. At last, in a windswept meadow, I found the greatest prize. A small plant with pale blue flowers, soft as sky, woad. The true blue of old Europe. Indigo had replaced it long ago. People thought it gone. But here, hidden in these hills, it still lived. I knelt before it, my fingers trembling, my eyes wet. I whispered, "Thank you." I returned to the workshop with my basket full. The women gathered around as I laid out the roots, the lichens, the insects, the flowers. They stared. To them these were weeds, pests, nothing special. But I showed them otherwise. I showed them recipes, the old ways I had memorized from dusty pages. We boiled, we soaked, we crushed, we waited. Soon the pots came alive with color, red deep as sunset, blue soft as twilight, purple shining like a crown. The women gasped, their eyes lit with wonder. They touched the yarn with reverent hands. They whispered to one another in awe. Day after day, we worked. The workshop filled with color and life. Cloth hung to dry on lines outside, glowing in the sun. Villagers stopped and stared, whispering. Something was happening, something powerful. The women who had once worked in silence now laughed, their voices light. Their pride returned. They were not only keeping the past alive, they were creating again. Their craft was no longer a dying echo. It was reborn. I too was reborn. The pain of my son's betrayal was still inside me, but it no longer defined me. I was not abandoned. I was chosen, by this place, by these women, by this work. I had walked into a new life. Then one afternoon, fate came to us. A car broke down on the road near the village. A woman walked in, looking tired but curious. She was tall, elegant, with dark hair pulled back. Her name was Lucia. She was a designer from the city, though I did not know it at first. She stopped in the piazza when she saw a skein of blue silk drying on a line. Her eyes widened. She touched it gently, as though afraid it might vanish. This color, she whispered. I have only seen it in paintings. She followed the thread to our workshop. She stood in the doorway, her gaze sharp, her breath caught. She saw the looms, the women, the cloth glowing with colors, long thought gone. And then her eyes landed on me, my hands stained with dye, my dress spotted with red and blue. She stepped closer. She touched the cloth I had laid across a chair. This red, she said softly. It is alive. I nodded. It comes from the hills, from an insect, from the old ways. Her eyes met mine. In them I saw recognition, not of who I was, but of what I was. An artist, a keeper of secrets, a woman who had found gold in the soil of the past. She smiled, a deep, true smile. Do you know what you have here? She asked. I did not answer. I only held her gaze. Lucia stayed for hours. We talked, we showed, we shared. She told me of her own despair, of her hunger for something real. I told her of the colors, the threads, the history written in cloth. By the time she left, the light was fading. But in my heart, a new light had been lit. Something was coming, something I could not yet name. But I felt it. Change was walking toward me, and I was no longer afraid. The weeks after Lucia's visit moved like a dream. She returned again and again. She brought sketchbooks, questions, and ideas. She sat with us in the workshop, watching the cloth take shape. She listened to the women. She listened to me. She spoke not like someone above us, but like someone searching, hungry for beauty. One evening she made an offer. Her voice shook with both fear and excitement. I want to use your fabrics. I want to show the world these colors. I want to bring them to the stage. The women looked at her with doubt. They had never cared for stages or cities, but I looked into her eyes and saw truth. She did not want to steal. She wanted to share. And something inside me whispered that this was meant to be. So we agreed. Together we worked day and night. Cloth after cloth, color after color, reds that burned like fire, blues that glowed like sky at dusk, purples deep as midnight. The workshop overflowed with life. Even the air seemed brighter. The women laughed like girls. The village hummed with energy. Then the day came. The show, Milan, a city I had never seen, a stage I had never imagined. Lucia's collection walked the runway. Models moved like shadows of angels, wrapped in silks that shimmered with our colors. The crowd gasped. Critics cried. Cameras flashed like lightning. And then at the end, Lucia walked out. She held my hand. She pulled me onto the stage with her. The lights blinded me, but the sound of the crowd was like thunder. They stood. They clapped. They shouted. My heart pounded, but I stood tall. My dress was simple, but it carried the blue we had made, the blue of the hills that saved me. The world saw me, not as an old woman left behind, not as a burden, but as an artist, a creator, a keeper of lost fire. They called me the alchemist of color. They spoke my name with respect. Far away, in a neat white living room, my son and his wife were watching the news. The program cut from politics to the fashion show. The anchor's voice was bright with wonder. Tonight, designer Lucia Rinaldi shocked the world with a collection filled with colors, long thought lost to history. At her side was her partner, the textile historian and artist Evelyn Gray. The screen showed me, standing on the stage, smiling, calm, alive. Ruby's laptop slipped from her hands. Marco froze, his mouth open. They stared in silence. Their phones began to buzz. One after another, messages poured in. Friends, family, colleagues. Is that your mother? Why didn't you tell us? You said she was just a quiet woman at home. Even Ruby's followers turned on her. Comments flooded her photos. You were in Italy with Evelyn Gray, and you posted handbags. How could you hide this? You abandoned greatness for shopping. Their world cracked in an instant. The image they had built collapsed under truth. The lie they had told that I had stayed behind by choice, now burned away. The whole world could see what they had done. I was not there to watch them, but I could imagine it. Marco's face pale, his eyes wide. Ruby's fingers trembling as she tried to delete comments, but they only multiplied. For them, shame. For me, freedom. After the show, reporters asked me, "How did this happen? How did you find this village? These colors?" I looked into the camera. My smile was calm, my voice steady. "It was an accident," I said. "A small disagreement on a road." I stepped out of a car. I began to walk, and I walked into a new life. I did not speak of betrayal. I did not speak of laughter that cut like knives. I did not speak of the dust on my shoes, the tears on my face. Those were mine alone. What mattered was what I had found. That night, as I lay in a quiet hotel room, the noise of the city fading outside, I thought of my son. I thought of the boy he once was, the man he became, and the choice he made. The ache was still there, but softer. He had thrown me away, but I had not been lost. I had been found. I whispered to myself, "You are free," and I knew then that I would not look back. So here I am, telling you this story. Thank you for listening. If someone has ever underestimated you, if someone has cast you aside, remember this: you are not broken, you are not finished. You can still rise. Share your story if you wish. Your voice matters.